Welcome everyone to our to today's entry from the Local and Family History series. I'm Jessie Wheeler. I am the genealogy specialist here at the BPL. And today our program is History of the Hub, Family and Local History Research at the Boston City Archives with Marta Crilly. Just a few things before we get going. There is a handout, and I'm gonna pop the link in the chat for everyone for those who haven't gotten it yet. There we go. Okay, so before we get started, just a couple things we have to do. First of all, we acknowledge that the Boston Public Library's Central Library stands on land that was once a water-based ecosystem, providing sustenance for the indigenous Massachusetts people, and is a place which has long served as a site of meeting and exchange among nations. We are committed to land acknowledgements for all locations at which we operate. We reaffirm this commitment to set the context for our planning. Deliberations and public engagement will take place from the spirit of welcome and respect, found in our motto, free to all. So just a couple more things. This program is being recorded. Everyone will be getting a link to that recording once it is up on our YouTube page. You will all also be getting a wrap-up email tomorrow that will have another link to the handout and a link to a copy of the chat transcript. The chat box is open, so feel free to, if you have a question or if you just want to talk amongst yourselves, feel free to do so. All right, and so our guest speaker today is Marta Crilly. She is the archivist for reference and outreach for the Boston City Archives. She manages the archive's research services, outreach program, and digital preservation and access program. She has an MS in library science and MA in history, both from Simmons University. Her professional interests include cultural heritage and community memory, family and local history, outreach to underserved user communities, and cross-institutional collaborations. And with that, I'll turn it over to Marta.
Hello, everyone. It is so nice to be here. Thank you to the Boston Public Library for having me. I always really enjoy doing these programs and talking about family and local history research and some of the resources that we have at the City Archives. So just to give you kind of an idea of where we're going and what this is going to be like, I'm going to talk a little bit about the City Archives, who we are, what we do, just to give you a little bit of background for what we are. And then I'm going to talk about some of the specific resources we have that are usually some of our most popular and most used resources for family and local history research. So I've kind of broken that up into researching people, researching places, and then I'm going to talk about some resources that can tell you what Boston was like, what it was like to experience Boston at certain points in the past. And then I'm going to definitely leave a good chunk of time for questions if folks have them. So that is where we're headed tonight. And I'm just going to jump right into it. So the Boston City Archives is the repository for Boston's municipal government records. So we're the archives that keeps records created by Boston's city government. So if you think about any record that could have been created in a department in City Hall, that record could be at the City Archives. And so that includes things like tax records created by the assessing department, logs of fires that happened in Boston by the Boston Fire Department, plans of Boston's parks from the Boston Parks Department and Commission, voting records from the elections department. Any city department is probably going to be sending some of their records to the City Archives. Our earliest record at the City Archives is from 1634, and our most recent record is from this year, 2023. And there's a mistake on that slide. I think this is a slide from a previous presentation I had given in 2020. And so at the time I was telling people, oh, our latest record is from this year. So our latest records are from 2023, and they're Mayor Wu's tweets. We harvest the tweets from Mayor Wu's account and the City of Boston account every couple of days. So at the City Archives, we have two main goals. The first goal is to preserve Boston's records. So we want to preserve the records in a safe and secure environment. So we have climate controlled and humidity controlled storage. And we store the records in such a way, that they're not going to break down or rot or get mold on them. And then we also keep the records in a secure location, in a records room with an alarm on them. If someone comes in to look at the records, They're in our reading room, they're supervised. So we make sure that, that they're not taken away from the archives. So that's one part of our mission, to preserve Boston's records. And then the second equally important part of our mission is to provide access to records. So it doesn't really make any sense for us to put all this time and energy into preserving the records if nobody ever gets to use them and ever gets to look at them. So while we do everything we can to keep the records safe and secure, we also do everything we can to facilitate access to them. And so we have a reading room at our facility in West Roxbury where you can come and look at the records. We also will do remote research for folks. So if you send us an email, we may be able to help you over email. And then we also have a pretty big digitization program, and I'm going to talk a little bit about this so that you can access our records without actually coming to the archives. A lot of our records you can access digitally. So just a little bit about the history of the city archives. So as many of you probably know, Boston was founded in 1630. This is a picture of the oldest record we have, the town book from 1634. And this is a record from the year that we were founded, 1989. So we are not as old, unfortunately, as the city of Boston. We were founded in 1989 after a survey was done of the city records in the custody of the city of Boston, and it was a pretty bad situation. There were records in file cabinets, in basements, in various corners of City Hall, enclosed municipal buildings. And so as a result of that survey and a report that came out, there was actually a law passed at the state legislature in the Massachusetts General Assembly that said that Boston has to have a city archive. So we actually are enabled by state legislation. And we are officially the Archives and Records Management Division of the City Clerk's Office, but we usually just go by the City Archives. Starting in 1989, we had an interim, quote unquote, interim facility at a closed school in Hyde Park. It wasn't very interim because we were there from 1989 to 2007. So a pretty large chunk of time. But in 2007, we moved into the City Archives Center in West Roxbury. And there we share space with the Boston Public Library, the BPDA archives, and the city's archaeology lab. So it's a great space for cultural heritage. Unfortunately, it's not, it's not right in downtown. It's not super central for people, but we do have a really wonderful facility with a lot of space for the collections and a lot of space for researchers. So what have we done since we started in 1989? A lot of our work has been gathering records from various city buildings and city departments and bringing them into, a safe place where they can be preserved at the city archives. So this picture here on the left-hand side of your screen, these are patient record cards that we found in the basement of Long Island Hospital. And so this is a pretty bad situation for the records. But we have seen worse. So we take records from these kind of inhospitable locations and bring them into the city archives where we can preserve them and people can access them. We have preserved 11 million school records. This is a really important collection of ours because it's not just useful for genealogy and historical research, but also people need their school records if they want to go back to school and for other legal reasons. We've digitized well over 14,000 photographs. We're actually probably closing into 20,000 now. And I will tell you a little bit about how you can access those. And so that's just a real quick and dirty overview of what we have been up to at the City Archives, just to give you a little bit of context and background for our work. And now I'm just going to jump into talking about different types of records that we have at the City Archives and how you can use those records to do your research. And I will say that a lot of these records are on the handout that Jesse shared. Most of what's on that handout are digital records, so records with links that you can actually link to. But all of the records that I'm going to talk about, whether or not they're on the handout, you can email us about them and we can provide either digital access to them or you can make an appointment to come in and see them. So I am going to start by talking about researching people, the records that we have that you can use to research people. One of the most valuable collections that we have for researching people are our poll tax records. They go from 1822 to 1917. Now, when some people think poll tax, they think it's associated with elections and voting, and that's true in some cases. But in Boston, the poll tax is actually just a head tax. It was kind of a flat tax you paid because you were a resident of the city and you were using city services. And all men of voting age paid that poll tax. Now, the poll tax records are in the same books as the real estate records. I'm going to talk about the real estate records in a moment, but you will see both of those up on the screen. The real estate records we have go through 1973. Poll tax just goes from 1822 to 1917. Here is a close-up of one of the tax books. And for right now, I'm just going to talk about the left-hand side of the page. That's your poll and personal tax page. So on the left-hand side, you can see that we have people's names. We have their supposed age. So that's the age that they told the tax collector they were. So, you know, it's not something that was confirmed on a birth certificate. We have their reported residence the year before. We have their occupation. We have their street address. And if they had enough personal property to tax, we have the valuation of that. Now, one thing that is really helpful about these records is that if you find someone in the record, you can actually trace them backwards through the city because you know their address the year before. So you can't really track people going forward, but you can track people going backwards. Now, I know that this image is a little bit difficult to see, so I've zoomed in on part of it for you. So at the bottom of the page, these are some folks that we have. So at the top there, you can see David Feldman. He's 43 years old. That little ditto mark means that he lived here, so at the same address in 1899. So he's been there for 2 years. And then we have his occupation as florist. And below him, we have Abraham Rosen. He's 47 years old. He is a tailor. And the year before, he lived at Calvert Place. So if we wanted to find him in 1899, we could go look at the book for Calvert Place in 1899, and we could follow him backwards. So those are our poll tax records. Now, another set of records that we can use to track business owners are our business certificate records. Our business certificate records we have two types of business certificate records. The general business certificate records run from 1907 to the present day. We actually still have these records. It gives you the owner's name and address. It gives you the business name and address, and it gives you the date the business was started. And this could be really helpful for figuring out when someone started a business. A lot of times folks know, oh, that business was around in the 1930s, but they're not sure when it actually started. And this will give you that information. We also have a group of records called Married Women Doing Business, or also known as the Women's Business Certificate. This is one of a smaller group of records that we have that documents Boston women. It runs from 1862 to 1974. Now, these certificates only exist if the woman was married. There were legal reasons why a married woman who is doing business on her own account would want to have this certificate. It has to do kind of with protecting the husband's property. I won't get into those details. So in addition to including, you know, the name and address, business name and address, and the date that the certificate was filed, it also includes the husband's name and the nature of the business. Now, quiz time. I wonder, and you can pop this in the chat, if you look at this sample business certificate I have up, is there a name that you see that looks familiar? Does anybody see anything? And I'm just going to check in the chat and see if anybody's getting it. Anybody see a name that looks familiar? Yep. Carol Ann has it, Leonard Nimoy. So Leonard Nimoy, as some of you might know, was from Boston's West End. And I'm going to have to squint at this, but on July 9th, 1948, he started his own photography business. He would have just been a teenager at the time, I believe, Leonard Child Photographers. And of course, some of you may know that Leonard Nimoy had an interest in photography and did photography for most of his life. So we found that record purely by mistake while we were looking for someone else's record. So that's kind of a fun find. Okay. Another set of records that we have that's really helpful for documenting people is our voting and election records. Now these records are kind of complicated, as you can see by this list that I have, right? So we have indexes from 1857 to 1900. We have actual registrations from 1864 to 1895. Then we have another index to naturalized and native male voters for this 4-year period. And then we have women voter registers from 1884 through 1940. So a variety of these records. And my advice, if you want to look up voter records, would be to just email us, because it's complicated enough that it's probably worth your just getting in touch with us, letting us know what you're looking for, and then we can help you sort out what might be the right register group to look in. I am going to show you an image of one of these voter registers. So this is the 1896 men's voter register from Ward 9, and this is the register for Decatur Street. And you can see here, we've got name, signature, where they live, occupation, place of occupation. So often actually like the address of where they worked, their place of birth. So we can see here, Decatur Street, pretty international. We've got folks from Russia, we've got folks from Ireland, we've got someone from Germany, Scotland, Newfoundland. And then if they were naturalized, we have their court that they were naturalized in and the date of their papers. And that can be really helpful, because if you know what court someone was naturalized in and the date, you can then try to get their naturalization file. So that's very helpful information to have, the court and date of naturalization. And then what's really interesting is we also have age, weight, and I believe is that height that I've got there. Yeah, age, height, and weight. And so that was kind of an early form of voter ID. So you didn't have picture ID, so they took down some of your personal information to identify you. But for folks who are looking for a particular individual that they don't have a photograph of, sometimes it can be kind of helpful to get an idea of what they might have looked like with some of that personal information. Now, a really exciting project that we have going on right now is our women voter registers. This is something called the Mary Eliza Project, and I believe that Jessie has a link to that, and she's sticking it in the chat. Awesome. Thank you so much, Jessie. So the women's voter registers are an absolutely fascinating resource. In 1920, after the 19th Amendment, when women got the right to vote in federal, in all elections, before women could only vote in school committee elections, thousands and thousands of women basically rushed the election department and registered to vote. We believe it was over 50,000 women. And these records are they're in handwritten voter registers. I've got a sample up on the screen, and there's incredibly valuable information in here. We've got name, address, age, place of birth, occupation, place of business, as well as husband's information, because women at that point got their citizenship through their husband. So that's all in here, but the registers are hard to use because they're not indexed, they're handwritten. And because it was such a busy time at the election department, women are not always registered in the ward book in which they lived. So a woman living in East Boston's Ward 1 might have gone to register in the South End in Ward 6, and her name will be in the Ward 6 book. So even if you know where your ancestor lived and you're willing to sit down and kind of comb through these registers, it can be a really labor-intensive process. So we have a project called the Mary Eliza Project, and this is a project to transcribe all of these women's voter records into a data set, basically into an Excel spreadsheet, so that you can search and sort and do all sorts of different things. So you can see how much easier it is to read. This is a screenshot of the data set. You can see how much easier it is to read this. And you can sort by street. So you can look at all the women on a particular street that registered. You can, narrow it down by neighborhood. You can narrow it down by place of business. So you can take a look at, all the department stores at RH Stearns who registered to vote. And then you can also search by name. So you can find someone that way. So we're going to be actually doing more programs on the Mary Eliza Project at different branch libraries. We did one at the East Boston Library. I think we're going to do one at Lower Mills next. So keep an eye out for that. But I just want to talk a little bit about it now and also share the link so that you can access it. Another thing I want to note is that this is in progress. So we have not finished this project. Right now, we've got about 20,000 women in the register, but we think we've got 50,000 to do. So we're not quite halfway there. Another set of records that we have that helps you research people are Hero Squares records. So if any of you have ever walked around Boston and you've seen a sign with someone's name on it, they're usually kind of like black signs at intersections, and there's often kind of a little star, and it will have a name. That's a Hero Square. And so those are squares or intersections that are named after individuals who typically died in wars. And so we have been digitizing these records. And in order to get a Hero Square, usually that individual's city councilor would submit paperwork to the city council. And that's the paperwork that we have. So up here, I have an example of Agnes Queenan Square. And this is in honor of Agnes Queenan of the Army Nurse Corps, who died on November 7th, 1920, in the First World War. So that's a way to find out who is in those squares. Sometimes the squares are, or sometimes the paperwork for the squares are quite simple. So you might just have something like this, kind of saying, this is who it was, this is when they died. But sometimes they would have submitted quite a bit of information. And so this, for example, is some of the information submitted for Ernst Karaher of the 101st Infantry. And you can see here, the information that was submitted gives information about where he died at Verdun, and about how he died, you know, on this particular famous hill, et cetera, et cetera. So it depends, you know, on how it kind of depends on the person, on how much information you'll have. But sometimes these can be quite rich. Oh, and then this is information that is in our digital repository. And so I think Jessie has a link to that if she wants to share. Yeah, and so there's a lot of different records in the digital repository. This is just one set, and there should also be a link directly to this on your handout. Okay, moving on. Another set of records that are really interesting and unique that we have about people are our rabbi certificate records. These are from the city's registry division, because if you were someone who is going to be doing marriage ceremonies, so like a pastor or a priest or a rabbi, you had to submit some documentation to the registry division so that you could fill out a marriage certificate. So that is what these rabbi certificates are. And this is a great resource for learning about not only Boston's Jewish congregations, but also specific rabbis. We have these records from 1893 to 1939. Our Jewish genealogist friends tell us that they are just incredibly valuable. And this is this is a sample certificate. And so you can see here, it doesn't just tell us about the rabbi, but it also tells us about this particular congregation, where it's located, the trustees, the president that's been elected, et cetera. And this is also available in our digital repository. And again, you know, you can go to that link that Jessie shared, but there should also be a direct link in the digital handout. Now, I mentioned that we had over 11 million student records at the City Archives. And again, this is a really good way to research people who lived in Boston. And so for students, we have student records transcripts, we have office cards. So that would be not a high school transcript, but like a grammar school office card. We also have scholarship records, yearbooks, and student publications. So there's a really wide variety of records. And again, because there is such a wide variety, my advice with these is always that if you want to use some of them for research, that maybe you just send us an email, tell us what you're looking into, where the person that you're researching went to school, and then we can figure out which records would be the best for you to look at. We also have records about teachers. So we have teacher qualification records, and these are basically teachers' education and employment records, and they go from 1876 to 1949. We also have a longer span of our school manual teacher lists, and those are just lists of teachers with their names, address, and what they taught. So lots of good information in those teacher lists, but the teacher qualification records are extremely rich, because as you can see in this example that I have up here, They basically give all of the teachers education and the way they moved kind of through the school system. So these are two other teacher qualification records that I just wanted to show you as an example. So on the left, we have an individual who went to the Massachusetts Institute of Technology. He lives in East Boston, and he's teaching, he taught for a while at Tufts, and then he's now teaching at East Boston High School. And then on the right, we have someone who is teaching, who was born in Jamaica Plain, went to West Roxbury High School, and has held a number of positions in the Boston public school system. So lots and lots of really rich information here. Finally, we have our list of city employees. So these are not nearly as detailed as the teacher qualifications, but we do have lists of city employees. So anyone who worked for the city of Boston. And these start in the late 1800s and go through the mid 1900s. And what you'll get there is their name, their address, their job title, their salary, and then the date they started working for the city and the date they were appointed to their current position. So again, you can kind of trace people as they move through their city employment. And there is a particular person here who is kind of interesting. And I wonder if folks see him and can pop in the chat. Anybody see an interesting name? I'll give you a clue. It's under the House of Correction. Yep, James Bulger. So that is Whitey Bulger's father, and he was an employee at the House of Correction. So that's a little piece of, that's a little bit of interesting Boston trivia for you. All right. So I've spent some time talking about researching people, and now I want to talk about researching places, researching buildings. So we're going to go back to the tax records, and I had talked before about what you could find on the left-hand side of the page. Now I'm going to talk about what you can find on the right-hand side of the page. So on the right-hand side of the page is your real estate records. And so there you can see the owner of the building, the value of the building, as well as the square foot of land and the value of the land and the value of the building. Something else that you can see is you can see buildings changing hands. So if you look close to the bottom of the page, you'll see there's that kind of red writing, and it says, I think James Smith owns in 1879. And so that tells you that James Smith bought this land the next year. So if you're having some issues researching deeds, this can be a really good way to track ownership. These records will also say building erecting, if a building is being built, and it will also note if a building is being altered, like if it's being added onto. And you can also tell that sometimes because the value of the building might change. Another really good resource that we have for kind of documenting places in Boston's built environment are our neighborhood photographs collection. So what we've done here, and this is also, there should be a link to this on your handout. You can also get to this through our digital repository link, which Jesse put in the chat. We have photographs in lots and lots of different collections. So in the Public Works Department collection, in the Landmarks collection, in the Mayor's collection. And it used to be that you would have to kind of go through each of those collections to look at photographs. But using our digital repository, we've been able to group them by neighborhood. So you could click on the photographs of South Boston, and you would be able to see photographs from the Landmarks Commission, from the Public Works Department, from the Mayor's Department, from the Transit Department. So if you're wanting to browse, photographs by neighborhood, this is a really great place to go. And I'm just going to talk about a couple of the different types of photographs that we have. So our public works photos document Boston's streets and infrastructure. They go from the 1890s to the 1950s. This is an example of one of those. This is Maverick Square in about 1900. And these photographs were done on glass plate negatives, and they are extremely high quality. So in our digital repository, you can really zoom in. So this is that photo, and then this is that photo zoomed in. And you can see the high quality there. You can see Noddle Island Taylor. You can see these two little kids. You can see MJ Kelly Undertaker at 37 Maverick Square. So these photos, even if at first glance, they look a little bit nondescript. If you zoom in, you can see people in windows, you can see print on buildings, you can see what's in shop windows. It's pretty high quality. We also have photographs from the Landmarks Commission. And there's kind of two different types of photos here. Some of the photos were actually taken by the Landmarks Commission. So there's surveys of different buildings, and those are great. Another thing that the Landmarks Commission used to do is, before there was a city archives, they used to kind of go around from department to department. And if the department had a bunch of old photos, the Landmarks Commission would say, hey, what can we use those? Those would be really helpful to us. And so they would take the photos back to the commission and they put them in their files. And then eventually, after the city archives was founded, they did send them to us. So the Landmarks Commission photos are kind of a mix mosh of photos taken by the Landmarks Commission for surveys, and then some much older photos that they collected from city department towards the beginning of their time. And then another group of photographs that we have are mayoral photos. And so these are photos taken by the mayor's photographer. So these are photos, of the mayor or of events that the mayor was at. But a lot of times there are great images that here of community members or community events. So for example, these two photos are from the Mary Flynn collection. And you can see we've got a great photo of Reggie's Hair World with Reggie himself in Grove Hall. And then we've also got a great photo of an East Boston Adult Education Center graduating class. So even though they're kind of mayor's photos, they're not really just photos of the mayors. They're often great photos of the community. And then finally, to kind of wrap up before I give us some time for Q&A, because I know there's going to be a lot of Q&A, I'm going to talk about some of the records that we have that show us what it was like to live in Boston. So a lot of the records that I've given you are helpful if you're researching a particular person or a particular place. You want to know the history of a particular building. But we also have a lot of records at the City Archives that just give you a sense of what it was like to live in Boston at a particular time. And so I'm gonna talk about some of those records. So a really exciting group of records that we have are our oral history records. These records, these oral histories were collected in the 1970s for the Boston Bicentennial Commission. So some of you may be aware that Boston kind of had a big to-do called Boston 200 in 1976 for the bicentennial. The Queen came, it was a big deal, a lot of different events. But one thing that Boston did that's really interesting is that they didn't want to just make it about celebrating the American Revolution. The city really wanted to kind of do the whole history of Boston. And they wanted to kind of get neighborhood histories. And so they conducted oral history interviews with folks in every single neighborhood. And they specifically tried to target different types of people. So mostly older people, but also some younger people, people from different immigrant groups, people with different religious backgrounds, people with different ethnic backgrounds. And what's really exciting about this is we've had access to the transcripts of these records for quite some time, but we recently got a grant to digitize the recordings themselves. The recordings are on cassette tapes, very fragile, we couldn't play them. So we have successfully digitized these recordings and you can stream them on our digital repository. Again, that's the link that Jesse put in the chat. We are in the midst of processing these and getting them up, so they're not all online right now. But right now we have the oral histories from West Roxbury and a set of oral histories called Black Bostonia that interviewed African Americans across different neighborhoods. I think we have maybe one from East Boston up, and we're currently working on the Fenway oral histories. But the plan is to kind of get them all up by the end of the summer, and that's something we're actively working on. So feel free to email us about that or to check back. And the transcripts of the interviews, those are all available now. Another really interesting piece of record or type of record that we have that kind of gives you an idea of what it was like to live in Boston are annual city reports. And I know that those sound quite dry, but they're really actually not. A lot of them are quite narrative. So I've given you two examples here. This is one from a 1925 school committee report. And this is talking about the continuation school, which was a school for girls. And it talks about what it was like to be at the continuation school, what types of things that you might study. I've also got a 1900 health department report. And this gives you, the 25 kind of principal causes of death during the year 1900. The health department reports also break down disease by city neighborhood. So you can see, okay, which city neighborhood had a problem with tuberculosis? Which city neighborhood was having a special problem with polio? It can really give you a sense of how the city was during that particular time period. We also have these registry division demographic reports, which are fascinating. And they have a lot of interesting information. But one thing they do is they'll tell you they'll give you statistics kind of ward by ward. So this is Ward 6, which is part of Boston proper. And it kind of tells you, you can see the topography, like tells you kind of what the boundaries are. And it tells you that in general, there's 21 people in each dwelling, 5 dwellings per acre. And it tells you percent of the native born to ward population is 38. Foreign born ward population, 61%. So 61% of Ward 6 in this year is foreign born. And then it also gives you vital statistics, which is really interesting. So as I wrap up, I just want to talk about a couple of ways that you can interact with us and get in touch with us. We are pretty active on social media. So if you are someone who uses social media, please do follow us. We post a lot of different mystery photos. When we digitize new collections, we'll put them up. We do kind of little behind the scenes tours and photos of the city archives. So we are on Facebook. You can see some sample posts here. We're also on Twitter, where we publish much of the same content, and then we also have a new Instagram account, which has been really wonderful. So whatever social media platform you use, we are probably there. So do give us a follow. We have lots of quizzes, lots of photos, lots of ways to interact with us. And then finally, I think that Jesse can maybe pop our website in the chat. It's just boston.gov/archives. You can also email us, archives@boston.gov, or give us a phone call. We're open to the public for research. We are by appointment, and that's just because, well, there's 2 reasons for that. One is that we actually have construction going on right now. And so for that reason, we really do kind of need folks to come in by appointment because we have a smaller temporary reading room than usual. But also just because our stacks are closed, and so we have to actually pull records out for you. It's really good for us to know in advance that you're coming, so we can pull out the records for you, and you don't have to wait. So that's kind of the end of my formal presentation. I wanted to leave a good chunk of time for questions, and I can see that we have some questions in the chat. So I will maybe great. I'll let Jesse moderate that.
Yes, we do have a few. Let's see. Let me go back up here. Okay, so Sarah is asking, I assume the boundaries of Boston proper have changed over the years since 1634. Do you hold records from cities that may have been absorbed into Boston or cities closely bordering Boston?
Yes, that is a great question. Thank you. So we have the records of cities that were annexed or absorbed into Boston. So we have records of Brighton, Charlestown, Dorchester, Hyde Park, West Roxbury, Roxbury. I feel sure that I'm missing one of them, but anything that is a part of Boston today that was annexed in, we have records from that city or town. We do not have records of towns that are not part of Boston today, but are adjacent. So we don't have records from like Brookline, Newton, Chelsea, Cambridge. They all have their own records. But if it was absorbed into Boston, the records came into Boston too. Great question.
Okay, let's see. So Kathleen's asking, would a widow running a rooming house have any business records?
She would not have a married women doing business record. And I don't think she would have a DBA certificate as well, that we could certainly check, but she might show up in the tax records. It's not for sure that she would, but she might, depending on how much tax she was paying. Unfortunately, sometimes in the tax records, those types of boarding houses, it says house by women. And that's all we have, no names, but it's certainly worth checking, and we could check it for you.
Okay, excellent. Okay, so Karen is asking, why did the women's business certificates predate the business certificates?
That is a great question, and I don't know the answer. Yeah, I don't know the answer. For whatever reason, they had men start registering their businesses in a certain year. I know the reason that women were having to register their businesses had to do with the fact that if you were a married woman, usually all of your assets were shared with your husband, and this was a way to keep your business separate from him. So it probably has to do with that. But I'm not sure why the regular business certificates start in the year that they do. It's a good
So we have a
research
couple.
question.
We have a couple of questions about the Mary Eliza project. So Hannah's asking, do you use volunteers for the data entry?
We do not use volunteers for the data entries. There's two ways. So there's the project is funded in two ways. One is through a public humanities grant from Simmons University. They funded the first 3 wards that we transcribed. Then we got a Community Preservation Act grant, and that is funding the transcription of the rest of the wards. Simmons University is still collaborating with us on kind of research and writing around the project, which is great. They have been wonderful partners. My collaborator, Dr. Laura Prieto, has been a wonderful partner. Another thing I should also mention is that Simmons University is also funding. So we also have women's voter registers from before 1920, when women could vote in school committee elections. And so Simmons University has started to fund the transcription of those records, but it's a massive collection, and we have done a teeny tiny little part of those records. So we will be releasing some of that soon, but it's a smidgen so far of those records. Still very cool.
Yeah, it is very cool. Let's see. And Marilyn is asking if the database is sortable.
Yes, the database is sortable. It's basically a big Excel spreadsheet, which sounds simple, but that's actually, it's great that it's simple because anybody can download it and use it.
Okay, excellent. Okay, so Kathy is asking, what years do the student records cover?
The student records cover a huge variety of years. The earliest ones we have are going to be from about the 1860s and then through the 1970s, but it really depends on what school you're looking into. The bulk of them are, I would say, from 1900 to 1965. But again, that's a good reason to email us and let us know who you're looking for and where they went to school, and then we can try to give you a hand with the specifics.
Excellent. Yes. Okay. So Joyce is asking, I understand that the Brattle Bookshop was so named because it was located on Brattle Street, which doesn't exist anymore. How does the Archives Office document information about street name changes or disappearances?
That's a great question. The Public Works Department has put out several street books, and they document past streets that no longer exist. We also use a resource from the Boston Public Library, the Leventhal Map Center, Atlas Scope, and we use that quite a bit. And so I would recommend that to everyone as well. We can always help with our street books, but the Atlas Scope is an amazing tool, and we use it a lot at the archive.
Yeah, I love that too. I'm gonna go ahead and pop a link into the chat for that. Atlas Scope is wonderful.
Please,
wonderful
please let's hype up Atlas Scope because it is marvelous.
It's excellent. I use it all the time. Okay, let's see. Marion is asking, you mentioned photographs from various city departments. Is it ever possible to access old photographs from the housing department?
Yeah, we do have photographs from the housing department. I do not think that many of them are digitized, but that's something that you could either come in and look at them, or if there was something specific that you were looking for and we had that photo, we might be able to scan it to you.
Okay, excellent. So Eileen is asking, can you talk about the Boston censuses in the early to mid 1800s and if there are any plans to digitize them?
Yes, so we do have those Boston censuses from the early 1800s. Unfortunately, we don't have a complete set for every year. We have digitized some of them. We digitize those kind of on demand. So if someone asks to look at a particular book, we'll digitize it for them. We do not have any current plans to digitize the full run of them. Having said that, since we digitize them on demand, if you were to email us and ask us for one of them, we could digitize one of the volumes and put it into the digital repository for you. That's very possible.
Excellent. Okay, let's see.
It would be a great thing for us to digitize. We just haven't. Yeah. So many things to digitize, so little time.
Yeah, we have the same issue here. So Lana's asking, can visitors to the reading room make copies of items that are not digitized?
So you can take photographs of them. We don't really use like a copier because it's not great for the book, but you can take photographs of pretty much anything in the reading room. And if there's something in particular that you would like scanned, we do have a book scanner and we could scan it for you.
Excellent. Okay, let's see. Caroline is asking, do you have any records related to city-owned cemeteries?
Yes, we do. It depends which cemetery, but we have, we have burial permits, we have deeds, we have some records on microfilm. So again, that would be a good thing if you want to send us an email, tell us which cemetery you're interested in, and we can tell you what we have. But we absolutely do.
Yes. Okay, let's see. And Stephanie's asking, I have relatives that were in Boston in 1630. Where would I begin looking for them, as I don't know very much about them?
So there's two answers to that. One is actually the Boston Public Library, because the town records, so records predated that are before 1822, are with the Boston Public Library in the Special Collections Department, right, Jesse?
Yeah, the original ones are, I'm getting a link for everyone here. We also have published versions of those records that were done by the record commissioners.
Yes, and that's the other thing I was going to say. Great. Yes, but there's also the BPL has a great LibGuide to kind of published city reports, including the records commissioner reports, which were like transcriptions of the records.
So I'm gonna, okay, so that's a link to the record commissioner's reports. It's part of the research guide about Boston reports.
And I would honestly, if I were you, I would start there, because it's so much easier to read than those handwritten records.
Definitely, yeah. I've seen images of those records, and oh my goodness.
Yeah, really hard to read. So I would start with the records commissioner reports.
Yes. Okay, so Eileen is asking, do the archives have fraternal or other religious organizations records?
No, we do not. The only, and this isn't fraternal, the registry division does have some baptismal and marriage records from churches, which is not fraternal organizations. Other than that, no. There are a couple of different historical societies that have those records. I know West Roxbury Historical has some. UMass Boston, I think, has some. Might be worth checking with the Archdiocese Archives if it's a Catholic religious organization, but I'm not sure.
So I can actually contribute to that. So for the for the Archdiocese of Boston, they are currently collaborating with the New England Historic Genealogical Society to digitize a big chunk of their records. So a lot of those are available on American Ancestors. So you can check with them on that. That's just for Boston, though. It depends on what area you're looking at. Okay. Let's see. So Judith is asking, if we know the address of the person but not the school name, can we still find school records, or how do we find the school that they went to?
Yeah, that's something that we can help with. If you know the address, especially if they went to a grammar school, depending on the year, we can figure out which grammar school was closest to them, and then we can take a look in that grammar school's records. So we can help with that, and we're usually pretty successful. Not always, but we're usually pretty successful. The only thing is, if they went to a private school or a parochial school, then we're not going to be able to find them. But we can figure out the closest public school to where they lived, and then try to get the records that way.
Okay, let's see. And Karen's asking, you mentioned a male when discussing the teacher qualification records. Were the majority of teachers male or female in the 1800s? And do these qualification records cover both male and female?
The qualification records cover both male and female. I do not have exact numbers on whether most teachers were male or female. I would say that in my experience looking through the records, teachers of younger grades, mostly almost entirely female. Once you get into high school, you get more male teachers, especially because, you know, not all women, I mean, a lot of girls did not go to high school at the time. You know, you saw that one example of the teacher who had gone to MIT and was teaching in high school. Yeah, I'm going to say that I think it's majority. I think it's still, as you get towards the late 1800s, I think it's still probably majority female, just because the primary and grammar school teachers are almost entirely female. But I don't have exact numbers. So again, that would be a great research project for someone. I encourage you to take it on.
Definitely. Okay, let's see. So Colleen's asking, what percentage of photographs do you think you have digitized? I'm guessing only a small portion.
Yes, but we've actually done some pretty good work digitizing our photographs. So here's the thing. We have photographs that are really, we have a lot of photographs that are less interesting to folks that we are not prioritizing for digitization. I would say of our most used photograph collections, the collections that people go to most often, we've probably done 70% or so of that. There's always still work to do because we have more collections coming in, more collections are donated, but we have digitized a lot of our photographs.
Okay, let's see.
You know what? I will caveat that though by saying we have an incredible number of photographs of negatives from starting in the 70s going to now, and only a tiny portion of those have been digitized. So if you're looking at our photographs like from before 1950, we've digitized a lot of those. If you're looking after 1950, yeah, only a very small portion. I'm going to correct myself.
Okay. All right, so Sheila is asking, do you have records from the City of Boston Child Welfare Department, which merged with the State Child Welfare Office in 1952?
Not really. We have some reports in the city documents, but in terms of like administrative records or like records of individual children, we really don't. I don't know what happened to those records. My assumption would be that they went over to the state when it merged, but I don't have the answer to that question. I would probably check with the state archives to see if they can help. But I also feel like people have asked me about these before, and I feel like it's because people are having trouble tracking them down.
Yes, okay. So we've had a couple people ask us, yes, this program is being recorded, and everyone will get a link to the YouTube recording to the recording on YouTube once it's ready. So that's a couple people were asking about that. Okay, so Karen is asking, are there any birth records from the 1800s?
Yes, so we do have birth records from the 1800s. However, the state archives also has those records and they are digitized. And so my recommendation to you would actually be to go there first. However, if you have trouble, you can always contact us or the city's registry division. They also deal with birth records. But for genealogical purposes, my recommendation for that is to go to the state archive first because you can search digitally.
Yes. Okay, so Marilyn is asking, would you have info on private social clubs?
No, only because it's not a government organization. The only thing is it would probably, if they owned a building, it would probably show up in our tax records, but that's probably not the kind of detail you're looking for.
Yeah. Okay, so we still have a few more minutes in case anyone has any other questions. So I just put in a link to the City of Boston Registry Division. The Registry Division actually has birth records going back a really long time. So if you know the person was born in Boston, and you know the date, you can also contact them.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah, they're a great resource.
Yes, I'm always referring people to them. Okay. I'll just wait a couple minutes. Let's see. See. Okay, so let's see. So Colleen is asking, is it possible that you would have a birth record that the state doesn't have?
Yeah, that's possible. Especially I would say for the early records. I think that's possible. Yeah.
Okay. Let's see. And Lana's...
So I would start at the state, and then if you are having trouble, contact us.
Okay, excellent. So Lana's asking, would the Bay State Democratic Women's Club be considered a private club, or might the archive have records on them?
You know, that would be it would be considered a private club, even though it's political. We don't really have records about political activities, just about government activities, which I know is a kind of a squishy distinction. But so, for example, we don't have campaign records from mayors. We just have records of what they did when they were elected mayor or were in office. Sometimes some of the campaign materials sneak into the records, but we wouldn't have records of their campaign. We would only have records of them when they're a government employee and a public servant.
Okay, and Doreen is asking, what is the earliest year for records that you have?
So the earliest record we have is 1634. And we do have some records of the town of Boston from the 1600s and 1700s. We also have records of annexed towns from the 1700s, but the majority of the town records are at the Boston Public Library in the Special Collections Department.
Yes, yes, and I already put in a link for the published versions
Great.
of those above.
Great.
Okay, so Marian's asking, do you have records for the Commission on Tenements from the early 1900s?
I don't think I have run into those records. However, if that was a city commission, we certainly might, and you could certainly email us and I could check into it. We do typically have boards and commissions records. That's just not ringing a bell, but that doesn't mean anything because we have so many records that sometimes, we may have records that I just haven't looked up before. So send us an email and that's something we could check into. The only thing you want to see is check and make sure it's a city commission and not a state commission. If it's a state commission, it would be at the state archives. But if it was a city commission, we very well might have something.
Okay, let's see. So Stephanie's asking, having a relative in 1630, would they possibly be part of the Great Migration?
I'm not sure which migration you're referring to.
So I think I can probably speak to that. So the Great Migration, for those of you who don't know, that was when there was a large wave of immigrants coming from the United Kingdom to the American colonies. So there was a lot of people who came during that time period is the 1630s, and that's called the Great Migration. Whether or not they're a part of it, I don't know. The Great Migration is usually considered to be a little bit after 1630, but that's something you could email us about at the BPL. You can just send us an email to ask@bpl.org. I'll put that in there. And if you were looking for a specific person, we do have some books about the Great Migration. So if you're looking for a specific person, you can definitely just send in a reference question and we can see if we can find that out for you.
Great.
Okay, so Lana's asking, are there many records related to Mayor Curley's various dealings? My great-great-uncle was on the board of aldermen with him, and they had some business dealings later in the 1920s, including the sale of a property where the courthouse in Brighton is now located. Oh, I live near there. That I've been trying to figure out more details about.
So we definitely don't have records of Mayor Curley's private business dealings. And we actually don't have we don't have many of his office records from when he was the mayor. Unfortunately, prior to the 1960s, it was fairly customary for the mayors to just bring their records home with them, which we frown on now. So we really don't have, we have a lot of stuff in our annual reports about Mayor Curley. We have things in our Board of Aldermen minutes, and we do have some of his office records, but we don't have a great deal. Yeah, and we definitely don't have I know we don't have records of private business dealings, unfortunately. If you know that he owned that land, though, the transfer of that land, I mean, that should show up in the Registry of Deeds, and it may show up in our tax records, but it wouldn't be very detailed.
Yeah, so I'm gonna pop in a link to the Suffolk Registry of Deeds. That's where most real estate records are going to be. So I will throw that in there for everyone. Okay, let's see. So Judith is asking, is working for the Boston and Maine Railroad at the Boston Navy Yard in Charlestown considered a city employee?
No, it is not, I'm afraid.
Yeah. Okay, let's see. Doreen's asking, do you have researchers available to research the 1600s and 1700s? Is there a charge?
So again, we would not be the best place to go for 1600s and 1700s research. I will say we don't have researchers that we employ to do research at the city archives. We do have a list of freelancers that we can send to you, and then that's between you and the freelance researcher.
Okay, excellent. Okay, let's see. So Eileen's asking, similar to the teacher records, are there any other professional records in the archives, in particular for physicians?
We do have some physicians' licenses. It would depend on the year. We may also have some for optometry, and I believe that is it. But again, feel free to send us an email and we can check into that for you.
All right, so basically just send them an email. They'll be happy to help you.
Yes,
with
that's
anything.
my message here. That's the
That's-
overarching message is if I don't know the answer right now, send us an email, we'll help you out.
Yes, definitely. Okay, so I think that just about does it. Thank you, Marta. This has been wonderfully informative, and thank you everyone for coming. You've all had some excellent questions. Our next entry in the local and family history series will be on May 9th. It is called On the Job. It's done by Margaret Sullivan, who's the Boston Police Department archivist. So she'll be giving a talk on researching people who worked for the public. So definitely feel free to join on that. There will be a follow-up email tomorrow with links to the chat transcript for this. So don't worry if you didn't get anything, get everything from the chat. You'll be getting a link to the transcript. And I will also be sending everyone a link to the recording once it is ready. And if you have any questions for me, my email, it will be in the follow-up email. You could also send a question to ask@bpl.org. So once again, thank you, Marta, and thank you everyone for coming. I hope you all have a good night.
Yep, thanks for coming, everybody. Have a good night.